Darren Morris here with the Garcia Group. I'm here with my insurance agent, Mark Rafail, with Farmers. And we're here to pass on a little bit of information about flood insurance and the changes that are coming along. Mark, why do we even need flood insurance?
Before we start, we're missing two ferns. Who has seen Zach Galifianakis' show? Next time we're going to have two ferns.
Yes.
Gosh, I laugh at that question. Why do we need flood insurance?
Yeah, why?
It's the biggest exclusion on every single policy for one reason. It's the biggest exposure. So guess what? No insurance company wants to take the risk. So the government says, I guess we'll suck it up and take the risk. The problem is half of Houston's not in a high-risk flood zone where it's not mandatory, and we're below sea level. We've got buildings like this beautiful, we're at the Compass office in Houston, by the way, 10 stories. It wasn't here 2 years ago, along with that apartment and that apartment. So the concrete jungle is real, and water can go any which way. So if you're living in Houston without flood insurance, you're shooting yourselves in the foot.
Yeah, I know quite a bit.
Or greater Houston.
Yeah, I've got quite a bit of clients, a few clients who never flooded at all. And the whole history of when they owned their homes, and then Harvey came along and they flooded 2 or 3 feet. So you're right, and those are the people that might not have had flood insurance, and they're the ones that should have had it in the first place, right? So FEMA, who is in charge of flood insurance rates, and they're the ones that pay out when a flood event happens, they came out with FEMA 2.0 this year. And so tell us a little bit about FEMA 2.0.
Yeah, I know it sounds a lot cooler than it really is, but for 50 years, basically, we rate it as you're in a high-risk zone and you're in a low-risk zone. And those areas that you talked about that had 2 or 3 feet were in the low-risk zone. Now, years later, FEMA's catching up and saying, you know what, we really need a rate per property versus just saying, you're either high risk or low risk, and everybody in the low risk is the same price. That's contributed to a huge debt for FEMA. Right. So now they've done their research and they're trying to rate properly, which I encourage people before they go out to talk to their agent and figure out what their rates are going to be.
Yeah, because it's going to be different for every single property now. We used to, like you were talking about, we used to be able to say, okay, you're in the 100-year floodplain or the 1,000-year floodplain or whatever it was, and you have this amount of money on your flood insurance. So it was $500-something, right? And that was across the board, but it's not going to be like that anymore. It's going to be per property. So speaking of floodplains, we have a 100-year, a 500-year. What does that mean?
Yeah, I know a lot of people will think that means every 100 years or so you're going to get flooded. Nobody can predict the future, but what it does mean is you have less than 1% chance if you're in a 100-year floodplain every time it storms, or 500 years less than 1%, and so on. So, but when we're having multiple storms a year, it adds up.
Absolutely, yeah, and they're getting more and more repetitive.
We had 14 in the Gulf Coast this past hurricane season.
That's crazy. Yeah. So let's say I'm a landlord. I've got tenants in my house, right? Do we have flood insurance automatically on the house, and do the tenants have flood insurance for their property? How does that work?
Great question. So a lot of times landlords say, oh, it's my investment property, and they don't think about flood insurance. So the landlord's responsible for their property, and the tenant is responsible for their personal belongings. People that move from Connecticut down here, they have no idea that a renter's insurance policy doesn't cover that. So FEMA will write a content-only flood insurance policy for the tenants, which, you know, for those people that rented a house and it ruined them in Katy, a lot of clients. And then the landlord, guess what? They got to gut the house and do it themselves. The FEMA charges a $250 surcharge on top of the premium whenever it's not your primary home, but that's a lot easier than taking out a second loan to gut out your house.
Yeah, for sure. So with all of this, when should, if you're out looking at houses as a buyer, when should you reach out and talk to their agent about flood insurance?
Well, Darren, I know when you're out and about and you put an offer, you've got, your due diligence time, right?
Yeah.
And during that time, that would be the time to say, well, let's look up, the flood insurance rates, and we can do something called a claims loss report, a clue report, that will pull up past claims on the house, because maybe there was a $100,000 water leak and you didn't know, now it's disclosed and you can figure out, was it treated for mold? Do you have a certificate? Because if you don't, and Uncle Joe took the money and fixed it at half the cost, you might not want to be moving forward with that house. So I think at that time is a good time.
I've started doing this just this month in October, because October is when everything started changing. So I have incorporated my buyers whenever they go under contract, even before they go under contract. We're starting to get their flood, especially their flood insurance rate. Insurance, we can talk about, it's kind of about the same as it always has been, the regular homeowner's insurance, but the flood insurance is what can tip them over a monthly payment that they might not be able to pay. So I have been sending all of my information over to Mark for my buyers, and then we're getting a whole insurance packet put together before, like you were saying, the option period is over, so
Correct.
we can decide if we can move forward with that house. So if you have questions about a property you want to see, let me know. I'm happy to help. And if you have any insurance questions, who are we going to call?
This guy.
Mark Rafail, and I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, Darren.
Over here today.
Appreciate
Thank you so much.
Till next time.
Bye.